Hey, thanks for joining me today. My name is Derek Diston, Vice President of Community, and I am very fortunate in that I get to talk to a number of people across this profession who have some unique experiences and have an opportunity to travel and meet people that most of us don't get to do. Joining me today is our Editor-in-Chief of CPA Practice Advisor, Gail Perry, who recently came back from the New York State Society CPA meeting. Gail, you and I talked a little bit about this beforehand, but I'm really excited to talk about today's conversation because you had a unique experience in New York, chance to meet some people. Why don't you let us know a little bit about who you got to meet?
Okay, it was kind of IRS Celebrity Day at the New York State Society. The day was billed as Meet the IRS, and they had in a collection of current and former members of the IRS who are from key positions. So they weren't speculating; they knew exactly what's going on, which was great. So I met with Erin Collins, who is the National Taxpayer Advocate, and Derek Ganter, who is at the Office of Outreach and Education, Trish Turner, who's the former head of digital assets for the IRS, Carolyn Schenk, the former National Fraud Counsel for the IRS, and I met with three former IRS commissioners, Danny Werfel, David Cotter, and Michael Falkender. So it was a full day of just absorbing all the cool things they had to say.
I feel like to anybody who's not in the accounting profession, right? If you said, "Oh, I have to go meet with the IRS," it kind of feels like most everybody else would be like, "Oh my goodness, what happened?" But you were really excited about it. Like you said, a couple of commissioners there. What was the biggest, let's start here. What was the biggest takeaway for you in meeting with all of these folks?
There were several, but I'd say probably the very biggest thing was that understanding on all their parts and really pretty much everyone's part at the IRS that the technology system there sucks. And I don't mean like it's, just it runs slow or, it's a few years out of date. I mean, it's almost impossible to use. I'll give you, I have this kind of organized by the different people I talk with, and so I'll give you their perspectives as we go through this, but it was eye-opening how bad it is. And also scary how unlikely it is that it's going to be fixed anytime soon.
So what is the reason behind that? Let's start there. Why is it unlikely to be fixed anytime soon?
I have some notes on that.
As a journalist, I'm not surprised that you have notes on all of this.
Okay, the IRS, in order to fix it, the IRS would need more resources, more flexibility in hiring. They need a procurement system and removal of the process steps in procurement. And they didn't elaborate on what they meant by that, so I'm not exactly sure. But interestingly, hiring more people and having flexibility in who you hire is difficult because it's hard to see an ROI on hiring an IT person. So there's that. Whereas, we need more people answering the phones. They see the immediate need for that. They said that there are two things that surprised me. One, they said it's actually a partisan issue. They said that the House Democratic Caucus is stonewalling this. And they're hoping that in the next few years of this current administration that they'll be able to get past that. But so far it has been very partisan. And the other thing they said, which was a little scary but not surprising, is that throughout the IRS, when they talk about we need to make change, we need to upgrade new systems, whatever, the response is, but the IRS system cannot go down. We can't afford to have it go down. The thought of a cutover to a new system is absolutely terrifying. So that's kind of the mindset that we're dealing with there. They did say, I was going to conclude with this, but since we're on this topic, they did say that, I'll give you the exact quote, it was, I think that, this is one of the commissioners saying, I think that professional organizations have an untapped ability to sway this process. If they could come together with thoughtful proposals, it would lay a groundwork on Capitol Hill. If you have 3 to 4 professional organizations weighing in, it could move the needle and this could become bipartisan.
So let's pull that thread a little bit. Professional organizations. Are we talking AICPA on this?
I would assume we're talking AICPA. We're probably talking the Bar Association. I don't think we're talking about state CPA societies. I think we're talking about national organizations. So the National Association of Enrolled Agents. I think there's a National Taxpayers Organization, or National Tax Preparers Organization, I'm sorry. I think that groups like that are really the middle people between taxpayers and the IRS. That's who they're looking for. But they want them to come together. They want them to have a thoughtful, thought-out proposal that could actually work.
Hold the phone. You're telling me that a federal government agency is actually asking for input and soliciting help from people? Man, that feels so antithetical to what we have as a stereotype, right, for federal government agencies.
That's so true. But they all know there's a problem. This was another really good quote. When we're talking about tech upgrades, one of the commissioners said, unless someone takes a position to do what has to be done, we're going to be here in another 10 years having this same conversation.
And how old is the current tech system that is underpinning the IRS right now?
Well, that's a good question, Funny. You should ask that. So they talked about the system and how outdated it is. And the way it was put together was that there was a system to start with ages ago. And then they needed it to do something else. So they built a new system instead of changing the first system. So then they had two systems. And then they needed it to do something else. So they created a third system, and on and on. Right now, the comment was made that if you call in to the IRS representing one of your clients and want to ask about their tax situation, you probably have noticed that they either put you on hold or they'll make comments like, oh, my computer system's so slow, I gotta hold on, we're gonna get this done. And typically, there's a 10-minute at least ramp up to get to the point where they can start to answer your questions, and that is because they are going to, and this number wasn't thrown out arbitrarily, it was used several times during the day, they are going to 18 separate databases to pull all the information they need to talk about this tax return with this tax preparer. And they can't get that all on one screen. So they're all over the place looking at stuff. So the comment was made that you think, this was the quote, you think that DOS is an old system? You should see the IRS. That all these patchworks of programs are put together in Fortran and assembly languages. And they don't work together. And that's what they're dealing with. Another thing, an obstacle that they discussed was the issue of amended returns. Our software packages, tax preparation software packages, have allowed us now to prepare and send in amended returns electronically, just like we do with the regular tax returns. However, the IRS is not prepared to deal with amended returns that come in electronically. So when you send in your amended return electronically, they print it, and then they start to process it at the pace that they do printed returns. Which is why if you've ever tried to call the IRS to ask on the status of an amended return, they can't tell you because it's in some envelope somewhere. It's not on any system, not any of the databases that they've got. So that's something else that needs to be changed. It was really eye-opening.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
I can't imagine in that room. So how many people were in the room? There's a question for you.
We had about 100.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm assuming there were probably 100 over and over, or, oh my gosh, like, sort
a lot of head shaking,
yes.
Like, oh yeah, we've been there, done that. Why can't you fix it? And there were some interesting suggestions. One suggestion was that they allow longer than 3 years to have a return open. Because the IRS sometimes takes longer than that to get a return to you. I will mention, just as a side note, that one of my tax clients yesterday got a letter from the IRS regarding a question we had posed in 2020. Yeah, and in regard to your 2020 return, here's what we suggest you do. And the suggestion was file an amended return. But 2020 has been closed for 2 years. We can't file an amended return. So I don't even know and it's not like that letter got lost in the mail. It was dated in this January. So stuff like that. Another suggestion that came out was regarding PTIN numbers, because the IRS has been known to publish all the PTIN numbers of all the tax preparers. And there's been an uptick. There's always an uptick, but there's been even more of an uptick in data breaches. And a suggestion that they took very seriously and said, we will take this back, this makes sense, was to every year when you renew your PTIN number, you get a new one. And so anyone who has access to your name and PTIN number from the past, that's no good.
Yeah, it doesn't matter at that point.
So yeah, I think that's a great idea.
It's like updating your password. That's something that we're all supposed to do frequently for all of our accounts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I question whether or not we'd want to place, from what it sounds like, with the system being so old and not updated yet, would we want to place that extra burden on delivering new P10s every single year.
And speaking about a burden, when Trish Turner spoke, she was the former head of digital assets at the IRS. She mentioned that we were talking about 1099 forms, and she mentioned that typically the IRS gets in 3 to 4 billion 1099s a year from all the different types of 1099s, interest, miscellaneous, dividends, all that stuff. This year they have added the new 1099 DA for digital assets.
Is that meaning like crypto, NTFs, etc.?
It does.
Okay.
And there's no minimum dollar amount. Sometimes most 1099s are like $600 minimum, or you don't need to file it, that kind of thing. No minimum amount on the digital assets 1099, which means if you had a Robinhood account and you put in $100 and then you closed it and you made 40 cents, you're going to get a 1099 DA. They are expecting, in addition to the 3 to 4 billion 1099s that come in normally in the spring, they expect an additional, wait for it, 8 billion 1099 DAs to come in, and they're due by March 31st.
That's, if we're saying that 3 billion, let's use that number for what? Let's 300 million taxpayers, I guess, of age maybe. So that's what, a 10 to 1 ratio. And now you're saying an additional 8 on top of it. So that's another 5 digital asset 1099s per person. Wow.
And they said that it's likely a lot of these will be issued to people who didn't even know they had a crypto account. Because, all of this is mysterious to a lot of people. And it's a great opportunity for things coming in from the dark web. They're just going to be inundated with these forms. I mean, that's trying to match them is going to be impossible. And the forms only include revenue from sales or exchanges. This year, they don't include basis information. So it's going to be on the accountants to go back to saying, hey, you got a 1099 DA. And they're like, what's that? Oh, yeah, digital assets. And they're like, what's that? It's like, oh, I need to know the basis. What are you talking about? There's just one little additional complication that we can look forward to.
Is it okay? Let me ask this question two ways. You're in the profession, both covering it for obviously as the editor-in-chief for Practice Advisor, but also you're a practitioner. Is it fair to say that from that aspect, from the professional aspect, this caught you off guard? Was this like eye-opening, the level of tech debt that exists within the IRS?
It did. I mean, I've known their problems forever. Everybody knows their problems, and there have been serious problems since COVID. For example, the 5-year-old notice my client just got. And the phone lines have been down in the last several years because their staffing has been severed. And so there are a lot of problems, and everybody jokes about the IRS computer system, but I didn't realize quite how archaic it is. So yeah, I would say this was very eye-opening, and I loved how open and authentic they were and willing to talk about this stuff. It's not like it's a secret, and maybe they're thinking too that if they get the word out more, somebody will jump in and say, we can help.
Instead of spending, $300 million on this over here, maybe we should address this over here that actually matters every single year to every single taxpayer within this country, et cetera. Second part of that question, now, you're the go-between as a practitioner between me as a taxpayer and the IRS. Do you think the average U.S. citizen is aware of just how impactful these old systems are? Or do you think they just believe the IRS is a big bureaucracy, therefore they're going to move slow because they can?
Actually, I'd say a third scenario. I think the average taxpayer doesn't realize how slow it is, doesn't realize how archaic this is, doesn't realize that it could be better. I think the average taxpayer, I think, just wants to put taxes out of their mind completely. If they have someone do it for them, great. They don't have to think about it. If they do it themselves or go to a storefront place, they're just like, here, you take it off my hands. I don't want to deal with it. Hold my nose, tell me the bottom line. That's it. I don't think they spend a lot of time thinking about how the IRS runs. And I don't even think they care, honestly. If they heard that it's archaic, it's like, just as long as it's out of my life, that's all I want.
I guess that makes sense because the average taxpayer is probably just filing a their W-2 or something.
Right, and they don't want to deal with the IRS. Yep. The last thing they want is a letter or a phone call. I get calls regularly from the IRS. My husband's like, "Oh my God, the IRS is on the phone." I was like, "I'm okay. I was expecting the call." You know, but normally, yeah, people don't want to deal with it. They don't care. It's like, I don't care how slow it is. Just get it off my plate. I think
Do
that's
you
fair.
think the average person who is needing to use a preparer, so now not the average taxpayer, right? And I've got my W-2, blah, 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 I'm fine. But the average person now who is going to a preparer for this, do you think that having that information that we have now talked about, how archaic the system is, how backed up it is, does that empower you as a practitioner to help them understand and have some patience with the system?
A little bit, yeah. Again, I don't think they want to hear much about it, but I think that anytime any of my clients need to have some interaction with the IRS, they're delighted that I'm going to do that for them. And the easier I can make it, if I'm the one who spends, an hour with them on hold before I even get to a person, my client doesn't need to know that. I mean, I put the phone aside. I'm not charging them for that time, but I don't think the average taxpayer cares. So I don't think you're going to have an uprising from the public about, oh, we need to fix the IRS. That said, there was a discussion about how easy it is to do banking online and how the financial institutions just made the transition. Almost seems like overnight, but it wasn't. It took, probably a good decade to get it running smoothly. But now most people don't think twice about going to their bank online if they need to, make a bill payment or a transfer or whatever they're going to do, or even just check their balances. Nobody gets out their checkbook and reconciles anymore. It's all you look at your activity online. That has worked, and there was a lot of conversation about how IRS needs to work like that. You need to, as a taxpayer, need to be able to go in and pull up your account. Here's your return from last year. Fill in the blanks. Here's what you need for this year. Scan in your documents or take a picture and send whatever. But just make it easy. And there's some things in place, like with the Taxpayer Pro accounts, the ID.me accounts, but it's cumbersome to get into those accounts, really cumbersome, and they're not totally effective. They don't do what they need to do. I think a lot of people try and give up. So, but if it were smooth like a bank, everybody can check into their bank account easily. If you want two-factor authentication, that's okay. That can happen, and that's the transition that needs to happen, and the financial institutions are pointing the way. But there's not movement at the moment at IRS to make this happen.
It feels like it's just we've kicked the can so far down that it's such a massive lift. The question becomes, is it build a new parallel system and eventually try and do some sort of tranched cutover? Work the bugs out with this small group of taxpayers or whatever before making the whole switch. Or take the time to individually replace components, like you had said. Systems have been built on top of systems. Well, now it's time to update systems. And maybe they're no longer written in assembly language and Fortran. Maybe now they're written in, going back to my coding days. Probably don't even use C++ or anything anymore. But, something more updated. It's a huge lift. The question is, what's the right way to go? And
yeah, I don't know. I'm sure they're talking about it, but until they've got the go-ahead to do it, it's not happening. And one other thing, just to drop this in and change this subject briefly, they said that they're really not looking forward to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act provisions because there's so many, they impact so many taxpayers. There's so much misleading information out there about this. It's amazing how many talk about how you're going to have no tax on your tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security. Total lie. And a lot of the things that were put into that bill, the guidance hasn't even been written yet. So they're anticipating this being not only a difficult tax season, but also either tons of extensions or tons of amended returns, which of course means paper returns, so, like it or not.
Years ago, I read a stat that said that since the advent of digital communications, emails, the number of documents printed has actually gone up. Because you get so many emails, you just print them off. People print them off. So you get that digital amended return. They're just printing that thing off. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, and I think accountants are absolutely known for that.
Even though we try and preach paperless, right? But as the IRS is saying, they can't be paperless because you have to have some of this stuff printed. What else? Anything else? Last sort of notes or interesting bits of information?
There are a couple good quotes I wrote down that I thought were interesting. was just trying to give a sense of who the IRS is. Erin Collins, Taxpayer Advocate, said to keep in mind that the IRS brings in $5.1 trillion a year. She said, we are the U.S. bank balance. I thought that was a good statement. I think that should be like on a flyer somewhere. Another quote, Carolyn Schenck, who spoke about fraud. It was a pretty general discussion about types of fraud, failure to file, making false statements, that kind of thing. But she talked about how good IRS agents are at tracking fraud. And her statement was, in terms of solving these kinds of cases, she said, I would put an IRS agent up against any federal agent worldwide when it comes to following the money. So, in other words, I guess if you're thinking of cheating, be really, really good or or think again.
That is not advice from Gail to get better at fraud. She is cautioning you on that.
That's right. So that's kind of a summary of what went on. It was a really great day.
Well, it's interesting because generally I tend to be, smaller government sort of. I don't necessarily want us to go out and hire a bunch of people to fill agencies. But I think in this case, if we were to say we're going to make a concerted effort to try and update the technology behind the IRS, I might be in favor of some appropriations going towards that.
Maybe. Or go to a VAT system, get rid of the income tax and just have national sales tax and one tax, one system, boom.
Having lived overseas in a country where there was one tax system, it was a lot easier.
It's so easy, yeah.
Excellent. Well, Gail, thank you so much for your time today. Anything else you want to add about the meeting that you had?
I think we covered everything. Thank you so much for having me.
Fantastic. Back at it. Good luck with both the filing and the coverage of the news.
Thank you.